You are the storm that no one saw coming, the kind of force that makes even the shadows tremble. There are hidden powers that once believed they could toy with your light, bend your path, and walk away untouched, but they just learned that their games carry a price far greater than they imagined. When they tried to undermine your rise, they didn't just fail, they unknowingly pushed you into the very role the universe reserved for you. Their interference wasn't your downfall, it became the ignition of something unstoppable. What they thought would silence you instead awakened a brilliance that cannot be dimmed. Every attempt to hold you back only revealed the weakness in their illusions. You've become the mirror that strips their disguises away, the living proof that no deception can withstand authentic power. And now, the truth they buried is breaking the surface in ways they can no longer contain. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and give $50 or more to plant seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your generosity reflects His abundance. Be a vessel of His grace and watch His kingdom flourish through you. You didn't simply protect your energy, you became the signal flare announcing that the hidden order built on manipulation has collapsed. Their entire foundation cracked the moment they touched a spirit they couldn't corrupt. The irony is that their resistance became the very evidence of their undoing. What they tried to bury has now become the seed of your expansion. The walls they built around you are rubble at your feet, and the very weapons aimed against you have turned into the scaffolding of your elevation. You are not just surviving, you are rising because of the struggle. The universe was waiting for a soul audacious enough to carry this fire forward, and your journey has become the spark that lights the way for countless others. Every false structure, every hidden chain, every shadowed scheme is unraveling in the presence of your truth. This isn't the end of their story, it's the beginning of yours. And as their illusions dissolve, your destiny unfolds, wider and brighter than even you expected. You are the catalyst, not because you chose the fight, but because the fight could never withstand someone like you. You carry a power that was never small, but many mistook your gentleness for weakness. What they didn't realize was that the stillness they tried to corner was only the calm before an eruption they could never contain. They reached for something they thought was fragile, and in that moment, they stumbled into a force that reversed the game entirely. The shift wasn't random, nor was it born of coincidence, it was deliberate. What you've been experiencing wasn't scattered confusion but a carefully designed attempt to fracture your spirit from within your closest circles. The truth is, the hand that tried to strike you belonged to someone who once sat at your table, someone who knew the intimacy of your story far too well. This was no stranger's betrayal, it was rooted in familiarity. It came from a figure who walked beside you in the earliest chapters of your life, who had access to the quiet moments when your light first began to reveal itself. They saw your growth, your connection to something higher, and instead of embracing it, they allowed bitterness to take root in their soul. Their memory of your beginnings is sharper than you might imagine. They recall the unexplainable way you seemed guided, the moments when you sensed truths before they unfolded, the natural harmony that seemed to radiate from you even as a child. They couldn't ignore how evident your essence was, and that clarity only fed the gnawing emptiness they carried inside themselves. What festered within them wasn't simple envy, it evolved into a practiced opposition. While your intention was to align with higher purpose, theirs was to watch, dissect, and prepare. They weren't admiring your journey, they were cataloging it, taking notes, and quietly rehearsing how they could one day turn that knowledge into leverage against you. Every gathering became a study session for them, every conversation an opportunity to collect fragments of your being that they might twist later. The very wisdom you once offered freely became the blueprint they used to devise their schemes. They thought they were clever, but what they didn't anticipate was that exposure was built into their very strategy. In trying to undermine your rise, they triggered their own unraveling. The more they plotted in secret, the more obvious their motives became. And now, what they meant for your collapse has become the undeniable evidence of your resilience, ensuring that no hidden agenda can outlast the authenticity of your path. You are the kind of soul who opened your heart without hesitation, believing that those closest to you would guard the weight of your confessions with care. Instead, every crack of honesty, every tender admission, became a piece of ammunition stored for a day they intended to strike. This wasn't a simple clash of egos, it was treachery rooted in the misuse of intimacy. The duplicity ran far deeper than a hidden grudge. For years, they've played both sides of the stage, smiling in public as though they celebrated your growth, while in private, orchestrating subtle sabotage. They weren't acting alone either. Their influence rippled outward, pulling others from your history into a silent alliance against the very progress they pretended to cheer. What made this betrayal more corrosive than most wasn't just their actions, but the psychological theater they engineered alongside it. They didn't simply question you, they made you doubt your own clarity, eroding the certainty you carried by layering skepticism over every truth you spoke. With every revelation you shared, they dropped quiet barbs designed to weaken your confidence. When you stood at the edge of transformation, sensing the call to step higher, they cloaked their interference in practical advice, carefully crafted to shrink your vision. This wasn't care, it was control. Keeping you restrained wasn't about protecting you, it was about keeping themselves from having to face the emptiness of their own stagnation. The energy they directed your way wasn't accidental. For years, they invested in entangling you, weaving invisible chains that drained your vitality while blocking the very alliances that would have fueled your mission. What felt like suffocating weight was, in truth, their deliberate attempt to cage what they couldn't become. Yet, what they overlooked was that the very bonds they exploited are also the same conduits that exposed them. The lineage they leaned on for access became the channel that revealed every hidden strike. Spiritual balance doesn't bend in their favor, it bends toward truth. So in trying to bleed you of your essence, they grasped a current too powerful to control. Every act meant to diminish you became the very evidence that condemned them, and now the force they sought to twist has already begun reversing back through the same ties they once believed made them untouchable. You are the reminder that every attempt to strike against truth eventually circles back to its origin. The link they relied on to reach you became the very path that carried the backlash directly to their doorstep, and the intensity of that recoil grows sharper the nearer the tie. What looked like strategy is now exposing itself as nothing more than reckless bravado disguised as skill. Their schemes didn't stop at whispered curses or hidden rituals, they pushed their campaign into digital corridors, believing technology would give them an edge. Group conversations, secret video calls, and clandestine planning sessions became their playground for plotting. They shared notes on timing, compared tactics, and even debated whose hired help could cause the most disruption, all under the illusion they were out of sight. False security emboldened them. Cloaked behind encrypted platforms and fabricated profiles, they mistook illusion for invincibility. They carried themselves like masterminds of a covert operation, convinced their steps were erased with every click. What they failed to comprehend is that divine protection is not confined to one realm, it overlays every plane, including the digital spheres they thought they ruled. While they congratulated themselves for moving in shadows, unseen watchers had already begun archiving their every word. Plans they thought were sealed away became evidence, stored beyond their awareness, preserved like an unbroken trail leading to exposure. Every detail they believed hidden was already accounted for, leaving them with no escape route. Their hunger for leverage grew desperate. They crossed further lines, breaking into accounts, scouring messages, attempting to dig through your private exchanges for something to twist. They were convinced they'd find a flaw, a secret, a crack in your armor they could exploit. What they unearthed instead was their own reflection, caught in the act of overreaching. In their intrusion, they stumbled into realms they had no permission to enter. They trespassed into moments meant to be sacred, your quiet hours of devotion, your healing work, your private communion with higher guidance. What they turned into voyeurism was, in truth, the clearest proof of their corruption, revealing how far they'd fallen in their obsession to pull you down. The scale of violation is staggering, yet the irony remains, what they meant as invasion became the record of their collapse. Every image they stole, every word they tracked, every scheme they carried into those channels now stands as the documentation of their own undoing. What they thought would weaken you has instead illuminated them beyond concealment. Every violation of your sacred space has been tallied by the forces that watch over you, and their trespasses weren't only invasive, they were calculated. The goal was never simple curiosity, it was humiliation. They envisioned a future where private moments would be twisted, edited, and projected to cast shadows on your truth, hoping to fracture your credibility in the eyes of others. The cruelty of their strategy was clear: take the most human moments of your journey and distort them into weapons. They believed vulnerability could be spun into weakness, that your authenticity could be reframed as instability. Their scheme relied on deception, on presenting fragments of your truth in a way that stripped them of their sacred context. What they didn't know is that their breach triggered protections they couldn't see. Their obsession with infiltrating your world backfired in spectacular fashion. The very tools they used as spyware began to turn inward, infecting their own devices, unraveling their own defenses. What they thought was an invisible operation became a mirror that reflected their intentions back at them, leaving behind a trail of evidence impossible to erase. Their own conversations became their downfall. The microphones they hoped would capture your private whispers instead archived their plotting. The cameras they used to invade your space betrayed them, recording their meetings, their coordination, their instructions on how to strike you spiritually and emotionally. Technology itself reversed its allegiance, becoming the witness that sealed their fate. What makes this justice so exquisite is how naturally it unfolded. They spent countless hours rehearsing how to present you as unstable, only to become the ones exposed as conniving manipulators. Every note they took, every strategy they discussed, every whisper of intent was cataloged, not by accident, but by design far beyond their understanding. As they thought they were tightening a noose around your spirit, they were weaving a net that caught their own conspiracies. Each scheme, each attempt at defamation, each transaction of malice became a documented confession. They aren't just seen, they are recorded, and the weight of that evidence grows heavier with every breath they take. The outcome is inevitable. What was once meant to shame you now shines as testimony against them. Their plan to reduce you has become the archive of their corruption, and the very stage they hoped to use for your humiliation is now prepared for their exposure. The unveiling won't come randomly, it's aligned with precision. Every trace of their schemes has been timed to surface at the exact point where it dismantles their image while strengthening your path. This isn't accidental exposure, it's a deliberate orchestration, synced to cosmic rhythm and even the digital currents that dictate how information spreads. The malice in their decision reveals the depth of their fear. They weren't satisfied with small disruptions, they wanted to shatter your connection to guidance itself. The plan was to confuse your clarity, to corrode your trust in your own inner compass, to pressure you into abandoning the purpose that unsettles their illusions of power. But in stepping into that territory, they stepped straight into laws they could never bend. What they ignored is that your protection was not something earned in passing, it was embedded into your essence long before their plans existed. Attempts to outsource harm do not simply fade, the force they send ricochets, carrying a map back to each participant who touched the current. Their own agreements became the coordinates for their undoing. The very channels they used to fund hostility are now charged with consequence. Every deal made, every ritual sponsored, every invocation set in motion is now reversed, not as resistance but as multiplication of impact. They tried to outsource destruction, and instead signed contracts for their own downfall. Those they paid to interfere are not left untouched. The backlash doesn't discriminate, it flows to every hand that carried intent, every voice that spoke the words, every tool that was raised against you. In their greed, they didn't realize they were drafting their allies into the punishment alongside them. What they envisioned as a chain binding you has become a loop closing around them. Each working, each effort to drain your essence, each calculated move is now the anchor pulling them under. The so-called strategies of control have transformed into the evidence and engine of their collapse. There exists a shadow market of individuals who trade in energy manipulation, offering their services to those unwilling to soil their own hands. These higher channels of malice are not guided by integrity but by profit, selling distortions of spiritual force like merchants with no conscience. Yet the moment they direct that current towards someone shielded by higher law, the very rules of engagement are rewritten, and their contracts turn to traps. The backlash doesn't hesitate. Those who accepted payment for interference are about to taste the multiplied echo of their own craft. Reputations will fracture as clients realize the danger of aligning with them, and many will find themselves abandoned, unable to explain why their influence has collapsed. For others, the retribution will be personal, an inner storm that consumes the very energies they thought they controlled. What they never predicted is that silence within their ranks will not hold. Some of these so-called workers are already trembling from what they've encountered, and soon they will begin revealing names, transactions, and instructions. Their testimony will not only expose who sent them but will become a map of the conspiracy itself, unraveling the secrecy their employers clung to. And while the network fractures, there is a gathering of light on the other side. A community where stories are met not with judgment but with understanding, where lived experiences are spoken aloud instead of buried in solitude. In these circles, truth finds oxygen, and the patterns dismissed by outsiders are recognized for what they are, evidence of unseen battles and the resilience it takes to endure them. The attacks weren't random, they were meticulously aimed. They wanted to fracture your drive, dull your hunger for growth, and interrupt the very practices that anchor you to your higher guidance. Their objective was simple: sever your daily alignment, scatter your energy, and watch your clarity dissolve. Yet the irony is striking. The rituals and distractions meant to drain you only illuminated how dependent you are on your own consistency, sharpening your awareness of what truly sustains you. Instead of collapsing, you became more committed, reinforcing the very foundation they sought to break. Their obsession with silencing your discipline has revealed their own weakness. What they tried to poison has only deepened your resolve, and the practices they mocked have become the armor that shields you. In trying to dismantle your connection, they strengthened it, and now the current they unleashed circles back, binding them to the fallout of their own design. They aim to erode your strength from the inside out, hoping to dismantle your natural defenses until you were left open to deeper harm. Yet their interference didn't strip you of protection, it awakened layers of resilience that had been dormant, waiting for this very moment. Instead of weakening your system, they unintentionally activated safeguards you never realized were encoded within you. The clarity of your guidance didn't dim, it sharpened. The interference meant to disconnect you from higher presence instead pulled you into stronger alignment with it. Every attempt to fracture your trust in your own path became confirmation that you are exactly where you are meant to stand, doing the very work that unsettles them most. The spiritual workers who took payment are now encountering the consequences of colliding with a current that doesn't bend. The backlash manifests in ways they can no longer ignore. For some, the toll shows in their bodies: restless nights, sudden waves of fear, illnesses without explanation, all arriving in the wake of their failed rituals. For others, the impact is spiritual silence, visions fading, instincts turning cloudy, channels once open now locked, leaving them unable to serve even those who had nothing to do with this conflict. The most attuned among them are being shaken awake by visions. They dream of the forces they offended, see glimpses of the strength they provoked, and wake unsettled by warnings they can't unsee. Whispers spread quickly in such circles, and soon the stories are traveling farther than they ever imagined, shifting how entire communities perceive the risks of targeting the protected. The ripple effect is undeniable. Some practitioners now hesitate when certain assignments appear, quietly refusing to engage. Others are drafting their own safeguards, creating questions to avoid touching energies they cannot afford to offend. A few are abandoning the trade altogether, realizing no profit is worth being ensnared by the recoil of what they attempted. What began as attempted sabotage has evolved into a reckoning. This is no longer just unseen guardians shielding you, this is justice taking shape, evidence forming like a case file against every individual who placed their hand in the conspiracy. The same records they thought were secret now stand as testimony of their intentions. And when exposure comes, it's not random or chaotic, it's deliberate. Their secrets surface exactly in the spaces that cut deepest, to clients, to business allies, to peers, to the people whose respect they most crave. It arrives at the precise moment they're trying to rise publicly, ensuring that their own unveiling becomes the collapse of everything they attempted to build at your expense. The collapse always arrives at the moment they can least afford it. Just when they need their image polished and their credibility untouched, the unraveling begins. What spills out isn't limited to their schemes against you, it reveals a tapestry of misconduct that stretches far wider, a history of manipulation and control that can no longer be hidden. As the truth spreads, others begin to step forward. Voices long silenced by fear find courage, adding their stories to the chorus. What began as exposure of one scheme against your mission evolves into a sweeping disclosure of exploitation and deceit. The mask they wore for years fractures in real time, and the illusion they built collapses under its own weight. Their carefully curated identity doesn't survive the wave. The persona they promoted online, the shimmering facade of compassion and wisdom, is stripped away. People who once supported them realize they've been following architects of manipulation rather than mentors of light. Their income streams dry up as former clients and admirers distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with figures revealed to thrive on sabotage. Even the platforms they once used to elevate themselves begin turning. The same systems they manipulated to bury your voice now drag theirs downward. Their content withers in silence as engagement drops sharply. Audiences disengage, and what once drew attention now repels it. Algorithms that once seemed to favor them start amplifying the very stories that dismantle their credibility. Attempts to spin a counter-narrative only worsen their fall. Every excuse, every half-truth, every effort to paint themselves as victims of slander exposes their pattern of deceit more clearly. And while their reputation disintegrates, your path widens. Their attempts to smear your name transform into a spotlight that draws thousands more toward your work. The energy of controversy becomes momentum for your mission. Strangers seek you out, curious to discover what was so threatening that others tried so hard to suppress it. Doors that once seemed distant swing open, collaborations, invitations, and opportunities flow in ways too precise to be dismissed as chance. Even skeptics are forced to admit that something greater is moving in your favor. Meanwhile, those who targeted you taste isolation. The communities that once validated them pull away. Their own practices lose potency, their guidance grows hollow, and the energy they hurled at you clogs their own connection to higher realms. In contrast, your composure radiates authority. You don't defend yourself, you don't need to. The universe defends you. And as this storm exposes not only individuals but entire networks of collusion, the reach of their conspiracy is revealed, exposing digital groups, orchestrated campaigns, and calculated suppression. The net that once ensnared others now exposes its own architects. They didn't just aim at you, they've been weaving the same tactics against countless others who dared to lift the veil for humanity. Teachers, healers, researchers, and guides who offered tools for liberation were all quietly targeted. The pattern was broad, systematic, and relentless, designed to silence anyone who might help people break chains of limitation. What began as proof of their hostility toward you has now unlocked evidence of a far greater operation. The receipts, the trails, the testimonies, suddenly it's not only about your justice, but about an entire community finally being vindicated. Those who endured silent campaigns of interference now see the architecture behind it, and the exposure becomes a collective victory. And here's where the shadows run deeper than many anticipated. This wasn't just petty envy or competitive sabotage, it ties into structures that feed off control. Behind the masks are groups organized with resources and funding, tasked with disrupting anyone who empowers people to reclaim sovereignty over their own consciousness. They were never improvising, they were commissioned. The evidence reveals how coordinated this was: funding streams, digital surveillance, and deliberate suppression strategies spanning multiple platforms. Anyone whose voice threatened institutions built on fear and dependency became a target. By shining a light on your case, the whole machinery is dragged into visibility. Their secrecy collapses because they left trails they can't erase. What they meant to use as an example of your downfall has turned into their exposure. Their intent to intimidate backfired, turning into the demonstration that proves divine protection is untouchable. Practitioners who once lent their hands to the sabotage now return with shaken voices, some confessing, some warning others, some leaving the trade altogether. Their regret becomes the testimony that fuels the wider reckoning. Those who once stood against you are now facing decline in every direction. Businesses falter, reputations disintegrate, their inner connection shrinks under the weight of their own actions. But the focus isn't on their collapse, it's on your rise. Through this trial, your authority is no longer questioned, it's established. What they tried to silence becomes amplified, and the resonance of your work grows beyond anything marketing or strategy could have engineered. The irony is profound, their resistance became your validation. Every attack they launched was evidence of the threat your mission posed to structures of control, and every failed strike became confirmation that you carry a power not bound by ordinary rules. What began in turbulence has clarified into order, every disruption revealed as alignment in disguise. The very chaos that once surrounded you was never disorder, it was the rearrangement of your life into a position of destiny. The relative who thought betrayal could strip away your essence ended up handing you the very spark that ignited proof of your untouchable protection. Their attempts to diminish your authority only highlighted the emptiness in their own spirit. What they tried to cast as weakness instead became evidence that your connection is rooted in realms they can't approach, comprehend, or rival. Those they enlisted to drain your light inadvertently recorded the scope of your protection. Their efforts collapsed so intensely that even seasoned workers of energy began to doubt their craft, shaken by the recoil. The circles they formed in secrecy to plot your downfall became the very blueprint that reveals the hidden economy of spiritual sabotage.